In the quiet, rugged landscapes of Western Ireland, where the winds whispered tales as old as time, there stood a humble stone cottage belonging to the O'Reilly family. The patriarch, Thomas O'Reilly, was a man of the earth, his hands calloused from years of tilling the stubborn soil. His family, though not wealthy, was rich in love and laughter, and their cottage was a haven of warmth amidst the often harsh Irish weather. It was a crisp morning in early autumn when Thomas first noticed the odd hue on the horizon. The sky was a clear blue, but the fields, which should have been lush and verdant with the upcoming harvest, bore a sickly tint. Walking out to his fields, his heart sank as he came upon row after row of withering potato plants. The leaves were blotched with decay, and the stench of rot filled the air. It was the beginning of the potato blight, a menace that whispered of coming despair. In the days that followed, the blight spread like wildfire, its deadly reach sparing no part of Thomas's land. The community was buzzing with fear and uncertainty, as many depended solely on the potato harvest for their livelihood. It was during these dark times that Thomas encountered the old woman known to the village as Mad Mary. Her back was bent with age, and her eyes, clouded over from years of seeing what others could not, seemed to pierce right through him. "You've seen the signs, Thomas O'Reilly," she croaked, her voice as brittle as dry leaves. "This blight, it's no work of nature. It's the black curse, awakened from the slumber of centuries. Your land, it sits on the ancient grounds, cursed by the old gods, forgotten by man." Thomas listened, skepticism wrestling with the superstition ingrained in him since childhood. The village had always spoken in hushed tones about the old ruins on the far side of his property, ruins that predated even the oldest tales told by the fireside. "Watch the skies, and heed the earth," Mary continued, her warning clear. "The curse will take more than your crops if not broken. Seek the old ways, or despair." With those ominous words, she turned and disappeared into the mists that had begun to crawl over the fields. Thomas stood there, the weight of her prophecy heavy on his shoulders. As he turned back towards his failing crops, the first hints of fear crept into his heart, mingling with the cold wind that swept across the barren land. The sun set that evening with a blood-red hue, casting long shadows over the land that seemed to whisper of hunger, desperation, and a curse that was all too real. As Thomas watched the sun dip below the horizon, he knew that the coming months would test the very limits of his resolve and courage. The fate of his family and perhaps all of Ireland now hinged on whether he could uncover the truth behind Mad Mary's dire warning. This was no ordinary famine, it was a trial by ancient forces, a challenge to break a curse woven into the very fabric of the land. Before the shadow of famine fell over the land, the O'Reilly family led a life marked by simple routines and modest joys. Mornings at the cottage began with the crowing of the rooster, a sound that stirred Thomas and his wife, Margaret, from their rest. Together, they would prepare for the day ahead, Margaret stoking the fire, while Thomas fetched water from the well. Their breakfast was a humble affair, usually porridge sweetened with a dab of honey or a handful of wild berries that Margaret collected from the woods. The children, three spirited souls named Aidan, Bridget, and Conor, would tumble down the wooden stairs, their laughter a bright contrast to the often grey mornings. After breakfast, the family divided their tasks. Thomas and Aidan would head to the fields, checking on the livestock and tending to the crops that were their family's lifeline. Meanwhile, Margaret, with Bridget and Conor in tow, tended to the garden, a patch of land by the cottage that yielded vegetables and herbs. Margaret was a knowledgeable herbalist, her skills with plants well regarded in the village. The afternoons were a time for community. Margaret often visited neighbors, sharing seeds or remedies, while the children played with others in the village. These visits were not just social calls, but a vital part of the communal life, reinforcing bonds and sharing burdens. Thomas, when not in the fields, would join other men in repairing communal tools or building needed structures like barns or fences. Evenings saw the family reunited at their wooden table, sharing the day's experiences over a dinner of stew and homemade bread. Stories from old folklore were favorite after-dinner tales, with each family member often contributing a piece of the story, weaving their thoughts into the fabric of ancient myths. Sundays were reserved for rest and reflection. The family attended the small stone church that served as the spiritual and social anchor of their community. The service was followed by a communal meal, where news was exchanged and support offered to those in need. These gatherings were the highlight of the week, a testament to the strength and unity of their community. In these days, laughter was as common as the bread on their table, and worries, while present, seemed distant like storm clouds on the horizon. The O'Reillys cherished these moments, unaware of the looming crisis that would soon transform their lives and challenge their deepest reserves of strength and unity. As the blight shadow spread across the fields, its grip tightened not just on the land, but on the hearts and spirits of everyone in the village. The initial disbelief among the farmers quickly turned to horror as they watched their primary source of sustenance wither and rot before their eyes. The once vibrant fields of green were now patches of brown and black, an eerie landscape of decay. The local market, usually bustling with trade and chatter, fell into a somber quiet. Stalls that had been piled high with produce now stood sparse and nearly empty. The prices of what little food remained skyrocketed, putting a strain on every family, regardless of their previous means. Thomas, known for his level-headedness, tried to rally the community. He organized meetings in the church hall, where villagers gathered, their faces etched with worry. Discussions that were once about harvest festivals and communal events now turned to sharing food, seeds, and survival strategies. Thomas urged everyone to check their storages for rot and to share whatever resources they could spare. Desperation began to seep into daily interactions. Petty thefts of food and supplies became more frequent, a sign of the growing distress among the villagers. The local constable found himself mediating disputes over resources that were once considered too trivial to mention. Meanwhile, the village elders, who had seen many seasons, shook their heads gravely, murmuring about old prophecies and the harsh winters of lore. In the homes, parents whispered worriedly behind closed doors, their voices a mixture of fear and determination. They altered meal portions, making soups and stews thinner, stretching what little they had. Children, sensing the change, played less boisterously, their games often interrupted by hushed conversations about missing meals and sickly livestock. As weeks turned into months with no relief from the blight, the initial bonds of shared misfortune began to fray. Suspicion and fear overshadowed the community's once unshakable unity. Rumors spread as fast as the blight itself, with some whispering that the cursed Mad Mary spoke of was real and among them, not just a legend buried in the past. The community stood on a precipice, their way of life threatened by an unseen enemy that was more relentless than the harshest winter storm. It was a time that tested the resilience of the human spirit, as each family, each individual, faced the reality of a struggle that might redefine their very existence. As the blight mercilessly claimed their crops, the O'Reilly family confronted the growing crisis with a blend of ingenuity and desperation. Thomas and Margaret, ever resourceful, refused to succumb to despair, instead turning every stone for potential solutions to sustain their family. Their first approach was to modify their diet. Margaret, using her knowledge of wild herbs and plants, began foraging deeper into the woods beyond their home. She taught Bridget and Connor which plants were edible nettles, dandelions, and wild garlic became staples in their meals. Aidan accompanied Thomas on fishing trips to the nearby river, a practice they had seldom relied on before the crisis. The river, thankfully, provided them with trout and salmon, adding crucial protein to their increasingly meager diet. Realizing the need for more sustainable solutions, Thomas experimented with planting alternative crops that might be resistant to the blight. He exchanged seeds with other farmers and tried his hand at cultivating barley and oats, grains that were not traditionally grown in their soil, but were worth the attempt under the circumstances. Margaret, meanwhile, focused on preserving everything they could. She dried fruits and herbs, pickled vegetables, and even attempted to. The children, once accustomed to carefree play, adapted to their new responsibilities with remarkable resilience. They helped in the garden, learned to recognize the signs of edible mushrooms, and assisted their parents in the meticulous task of food preservation. Each step they took was a small victory against a backdrop of relentless hardship. The O'Reillys' proactive attempts to diversify their food sources and their unified approach to overcoming adversity underscored a crucial lesson. Even in the direst times, a family's unified strength could be their greatest asset. As the blight deepened its grip on the land, the community elders began to murmur about an old legend, seldom spoken yet deeply ingrained in the village's collective memory. These whispers reached Thomas one chilly evening, as he sought counsel from the eldest among them, Old Finnegan, a man whose lineage traced back as far as the village records. Old Finnegan, his voice as raspy as the autumn leaves that skittered across the cobblestones, invited Thomas into his modest home. The walls, lined with faded photographs and maps, bore witness to the history they discussed. "Your land, Thomas," he began, his hands trembling slightly as he unrolled an ancient yellowed map, "sits atop what was once sacred ground. It's no ordinary stretch of earth." He pointed to a spot marked with a series of intricate symbols, just at the edge of what was now Thomas's property. "See here. This symbol represents a covenant made long ago, between our ancestors and the spirits of the land. They promised to protect and nourish the land, in return for its bounteous yields. According to the legend, the covenant was broken generations ago, when an ancestor of Thomas unwittingly removed a stone marker, an act that unleashed a curse upon the land. It was said that the land would turn against its keeper should the balance ever be disrupted, old Finnegan continued, his eyes wide with the gravity of the tale. The elders around the village had noticed the signs, subtle yet unmistakable, that the curse was more than just lore. Strange occurrences, such as unseasonal frosts and the appearance of ravens, were seen as omens. They shared these observations with Thomas, each anecdote adding weight to the legend's authenticity. These sessions with the elders became a regular part of Thomas's evenings. He would listen intently, absorbing each detail, each variation of the story as told by different voices. The tales varied in elements and emphasis, but the core remained consistent. A betrayal of the ancient spirits and a curse that brought ruin as its consequence. Armed with this knowledge, Thomas felt a mix of dread and resolve. If the blight was indeed a manifestation of this ancient curse, then understanding its roots might be the key to combating it. The task was daunting, but the legend provided a starting point, a thread to follow back through the tangled history of his land and family. Determined to protect his family and restore his land, Thomas decided to delve deeper into the village's past, seeking out any clues that might lead to breaking the curse. His journey into the heart of the legend was not just a quest for survival, but a mission to right the wrongs of generations past and restore the balance between his family and the land that sustained them. Driven by the urgent need to understand the roots of his land's misfortune, Thomas embarked on a thorough investigation of the ancient legend detailed by old Finnegan and other elders. This quest led him to the village's small, dusty library, a repository of local histories and ancient manuscripts seldom frequented by the townsfolk. Within the cramped, musty shelves, Thomas found a faded leather-bound tome, its pages yellowed with age. The book, written by a long-departed historian of the village, contained detailed accounts of Celtic rituals and several references to land curses. It spoke of the Druids, the ancient Celtic priests who were believed to have the power to bless and curse the lands, according to the will of the gods. As Thomas pored over the cryptic texts, he discovered references to a specific ritual that was conducted to ensure the fertility of the land. This ritual involved placing sacred stones around the perimeter of the village, each stone inscribed with Agam, an ancient script. These stones were not merely decorative, but served as a pact between the villagers and the deities who presided over the harvests. The text revealed that the removal or damage of these stones could lead to dire consequences, as they were the physical manifestation of the village's respect and reverence towards nature's spirits. The historian's note suggested that the breaking of such a pact would invoke at the Olta's Nandi the revenge of the gods, resulting in years of hardship and misfortune, until the balance was restored. Intrigued and alarmed by these findings, Thomas sought further clarity by visiting the ruins on the edge of his property, where he spent hours clearing overgrowth and digging around the suspected locations of the sacred stones. His efforts paid off when he unearthed a fragment of stone with faint, but still discernible Agam carvings. This tangible piece of history in his hands felt like a direct link to the ancient past and the curse that now plagued his family. Realizing the significance of this discovery, Thomas meticulously documented the location and appearance of the stone fragment. He made sketches and took notes, hoping they would be useful in finding a way to reverse the curse. His evenings were consumed with translating the Agam script, using every resource the library had to offer. Each piece of the puzzle that Thomas assembled deepened his understanding of the weighty heritage his family's land carried. It became clear that this was not merely a struggle for survival against a natural disaster, but a battle to appease the ancient forces his ancestors had once revered. Armed with knowledge and a growing sense of responsibility, Thomas prepared to take whatever steps necessary to restore harmony to the land and lift the curse that had brought so much suffering to his community. As Thomas delved deeper into the ancient lore surrounding his land, the skepticism among his neighbors and even within his own family grew. His tales of curses and ancient rituals were met with raised eyebrows and dismissive shakes of the head. In a time of such tangible despair, many found it easier to believe in the unfortunate luck of nature than in curses from a bygone era. In the local pub, where the community often gathered to share news and support each other, Thomas's theories became a topic of hushed conversation. "Thomas is chasing shadows while we all starve," one villager muttered, skepticism lacing his tired voice. Another added, "We need practical solutions, not old wives' tales." These sentiments echoed through the community, creating a divide between those desperate enough to consider any possibility and those who viewed Thomas's actions as a distraction from more concrete survival strategies. Even Margaret, always a pillar of support, found herself questioning Thomas's focus. "Tom, the children are hungry," she would whisper late at night, her voice heavy with worry. "We need food, not folklore." Her practical concerns resonated more as the blight showed no signs of abating, and the pantry grew emptier by the day. The children, too, felt the strain. Bridget, once so eager to learn about plants and herbs, now frowned at her father's books strewn across the kitchen table. "Dad, can these old stories plant new crops?" she asked one evening, her tone a mix of innocence and frustration. Connor, usually quiet, expressed his doubts through silence, often staring out at the blighted fields with a furrowed brow. Thomas understood their concerns, but felt a compelling duty to continue his research. He tried to explain how solving the mystery could be their ultimate salvation, not just a temporary fix. "If there's even a small chance that breaking this curse could restore our land, don't we owe it to ourselves to try?" he argued during a particularly tense dinner, his voice echoing a mix of frustration and conviction. Yet, the daily grind of survival left little room for the pursuit of legends, and Thomas's solitary quest began to feel increasingly quixotic. The palpable skepticism served as a constant reminder of the stakes at hand: the survival of his family and the preservation of their way of life. Each passing day without progress tested the patience and faith of everyone around him, embedding a deep sense of urgency in his endeavors. As the blight persisted, its effects on the O'Reilly family became more pronounced and painful. Each day, the once cheerful laughter that filled their home grew rarer, replaced by a somber quiet that spoke volumes. The family's struggle with increasing hunger and the encroaching despair was palpable in the air, heavy and thick as the fog that often rolled over their village. Margaret found herself rising earlier each morning, her sleep disturbed by the gnawing worry for her children's well-being. She would visit the kitchen to knead and bake the last of their flour into bread, each loaf smaller than the last. Her hands, once steady and sure, now trembled with fatigue as she sliced the meager portions, ensuring everyone had at least a little to stave off the hunger pains. Thomas watched his once robust children become quieter, their playful energy dimmed by the lack of adequate nutrition. Bridget, previously curious and vibrant, now spent her days listlessly helping her mother in the garden, her small hands pulling at weeds that seemed to flourish while everything else wilted. Her once frequent questions about the natural world around them had dwindled, replaced by a quiet acceptance of their harsh reality. Connor, the youngest, often sat by the window, his eyes tracing the flight of birds outside. His imagination, which once envisioned castles in the clouds and adventures in the woods, now seemed tethered by the visible ribs under his too loose shirt. The change in him was perhaps the most painful for Margaret to witness, a daily reminder of their dire situation. In the evenings, the family gathered around a flickering candle, its light casting long shadows across the room. They shared stories from better times, each tale a precious reminder of joy and abundance. Yet, these stories were also a cruel mirror to their current plight, making the laughter they evoked brittle, tinged with nostalgia and loss. During one particularly harsh week, when the winds howled like the hungry wolves of ancient tales, the family faced the reality that their food stores were nearly depleted. The discussion that night was not about stories but about survival. Thomas, his voice hoarse with desperation, proposed that they might need to leave their home in search of aid and sustenance. This suggestion, though practical, felt like a defeat to them all. To leave would be to abandon the land and home that had been in their family for generations. Yet, they knew that staying might cost them even more dearly. The weight of this decision pressed down on them, a stark reminder of their vulnerability in the face of nature's relentless force. Each member of the family lay awake that night, the howling wind a grim lullaby, as they grappled with the realization that their lives had irrevocably changed. The battle against hunger and despair was not just about sustaining their bodies, but also about preserving the spirit of a family bound by love and tested by a harsh fate. As the blight's devastating effects continued, the fabric of the community that once held strong began to fray. In the village, where trust and cooperation had flourished, suspicion and discord now took root, fueled by the growing desperation of its inhabitants. The once common scenes of neighbors helping neighbors were replaced by a guardedness that bordered on hostility. Bartering, a practice that had always been done in good faith, became a tense affair. Accusations of unfair trades or hoarding supplies were whispered at the market, each word adding to the building distrust. At the village well, where people had gathered not only to draw water but also to exchange news and pleasantries, conversations now often turned sharp. One morning, a heated argument erupted between two longtime friends over a simple misunderstanding about a borrowed plow. The altercation, witnessed by a gathering crowd, ended with bitter words and a vow of severed ties, a poignant symbol of the community's fracturing. This atmosphere of tension was further exacerbated by the arrival of outsiders, desperate families from neighboring villages also struck by the famine, seeking any help they could find. Their presence stirred a mix of sympathy and resentment among the local residents. While some villagers called for aid to be shared, others, gripped by fear for their own survival, argued that the scant resources they had left should be preserved for their own. In the local tavern, once a place of joviality and respite, the mood had shifted dramatically. Conversations often veered into dark territories, with some patrons spinning wild theories about those they deemed responsible for their plight. A particularly volatile night saw accusations fly about certain families allegedly making secret pacts to secure their survival, claims that were baseless but fueled by the rampant paranoia. Even the church, a sanctuary that had offered solace and unity, was not immune to the community's growing discord. The parish priest, Father O'Malley, found himself mediating not just spiritual crises, but also mounting grievances among his flock. During a particularly tense service, he pleaded for calm and unity, his voice echoing through the cold stone walls. "We must not let this famine destroy who we are, the community we have built. We stand together, or we fall apart." But as the famine stretched on, these words seemed to resonate less and less. The fabric of trust that had once made the community resilient now seemed as tattered as the field surrounding them. The village, bound by centuries of shared history, now teetered on the brink of an internal collapse, mirroring the desolation of their lands. This was a different kind of hunger, a hunger for reassurance, for a return to normalcy, and most profoundly, for a revival of the compassion that had once defined them. As the community's fabric continued to unravel under the strain of the blight, the O'Reilly family found themselves increasingly isolated, their belief in the ancient curse driving a wedge between them and their neighbors. This isolation was not just a physical distance, but a growing emotional and social divide that set the family apart in profound ways. Thomas's persistent investigation into the curse and his frequent mentions of ancient rituals and forgotten pacts were met with skepticism that soon turned into wariness. The more he spoke of curses and mystical solutions, the more the villagers viewed him as an outsider, a man lost to old legends, while everyone else was grappling with the harsh realities of starvation and loss. Margaret, once a cherished source of wisdom and herbal remedies, now found fewer visitors knocking on her door. The whispers about Thomas's odd behavior had extended to her, tainting the community's perception of the entire family. Her offers to help with ailments were politely declined, and the warm camaraderie she once shared with other village women cooled significantly. The children, too, felt the sting of this isolation. Aidan, Bridget, and Connor encountered a shift in their peers' attitudes. Invitations to play games or join in the usual gatherings of village children dwindled. Whispers and stares followed them during their chores in the village or on their way to school. The siblings found solace only in each other's company, their home becoming both their sanctuary and their cage. At the village church, the family sat in the back pews, the empty seats around them a clear indicator of their social pariah status. The cold glances and even colder silences they met made each Sunday service a trial, a stark contrast to the warm community worship they once knew. Even within the walls of their own home, the isolation was palpable. Discussions about the day's hardships were now interspersed with conversations about who had turned away from them or uttered harsh words under their breath. These moments tested the family's resolve, each incident a reminder of their increasing solitude. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, the O'Reillys clung tighter to each other. They found strength in their shared belief in the curse and in Thomas's determination to break it. In their isolation, they forged a new bond, one built on mutual support and the shared hope that one day, understanding and overcoming the curse would restore not only their land, but also their place within the community. This period of adversity highlighted not just the challenges of facing societal rejection, but also the resilience of a family determined to stick to their convictions, even in the face of widespread doubt and isolation. Their home, once filled with the laughter and visits of many, now echoed with the resolve and unity of the few who believed in the path they had chosen. Determined to address the root of his family's suffering and the village's blight, Thomas made a resolute decision to uncover the origins of the curse that Mad Mary had spoken of. This decision marked a pivotal moment for Thomas and his family, who saw it as possibly their last chance to reverse the fortunes of their dwindling prospects. Early one misty morning, with the dew still clinging to the grass, Thomas prepared for a journey that would take him away from his family and deeper into the heart of ancient Irish lore. He packed provisions, dried meats, a flask of water, and some of Margaret's hearty bread along with a map old Finnegan had shown him, which detailed areas reputed to hold ancient ruins and significant historical relevance. Before leaving, Thomas sat his family down in the dim light of their kitchen. He explained the necessity of his journey, outlining where he intended to go and what he hoped to discover. "I need to find the original stones that were disturbed," he told them, his voice firm with purpose. "It's our only chance to possibly undo what's been done and lift this curse off our land and lives." Margaret, despite her initial reservations about the curse, now saw the resolve in her husband and understood the depth of his commitment. She nodded, her expression. Thomas embarked on his journey, traveling through the rolling hills and valleys that made up the rural Irish landscape. He visited old sites, some hidden by overgrowth and forgotten by time, each one possibly a key to understanding the ancient curse. At each location, he sketched and took notes, meticulously documenting any signs of old rituals or disturbed sacred stones. His journey led him to a particularly secluded area, marked on the map as a site of druidic significance. Here, amid the ruins of a stone circle, he felt a palpable sense of history, as if the whispers of the past were seeping through the moss-covered rocks. He spent hours there, searching for any artifact or symbol that matched the descriptions in his ancient tome, hoping to find clues that could lead to breaking the curse. As the days passed, Thomas's physical exhaustion grew, but so did his understanding of the depth and complexity of the curse. Each evening, under the stars, he pored over his notes, connecting dots between the lore, the land, and the current plight. This quest, driven by a mix of desperation and hope, was more than a physical journey for Thomas. It was a voyage into the past, seeking redemption and a future free from the ancient chains that now held his family and his village in thrall. Each step forward on this lonely path was a step toward possibly reclaiming the life they had once known, driven by the belief that understanding the past might finally allow them to heal and move forward. Thomas's journey to unearth the origins of the curse took him through some of the most desolate and famine-stricken parts of Ireland. The landscapes, once vibrant and teeming with life, now lay barren, the earth cracked and dry, fields once green now a dull gray under the overcast sky. It was a stark visual reminder of the devastation that the blight had wrought on the land and its people. With each mile traveled, the severity of the famine revealed itself more fully. Thomas passed through villages where empty homes stood as silent sentinels to the desperation that had driven their inhabitants to seek sustenance elsewhere. In places where communities still held on, the air was thick with despair. Children with hollow eyes watched from doorways, their expressions old beyond their years. The roads, once bustling with carts filled with produce headed for market, were now mostly empty, save for the occasional weary traveler like himself or a lone merchant cart, struggling to find trade. The ground was littered with fallen leaves and the remnants of unsuccessful harvests, the soil beneath them parched and lifeless. As he ventured further into remote areas, the terrain became rougher, the paths less trodden. Thick brambles and overgrown weeds clouded his clothing as he made his way through narrow trails. The wind carried the chill of the coming winter, biting through his coat and reminding him of the urgency of his mission. Occasionally, Thomas encountered other seekers and wanderers, some driven by similar quests for answers, others merely trying to escape the grip of hunger. He exchanged words with these fellow travelers, their stories weaving a tapestry of shared suffering and mutual understanding. These encounters, brief as they were, provided Thomas with snippets of lore and warnings about the land ahead, which helped guide his journey. Navigating through a particularly rugged stretch, Thomas found himself at the edge of a steep valley. Here, the true impact of the famine was on display. A once flourishing river had been reduced to a mere trickle, its banks lined with the remnants of fish and other wildlife that once thrived in its waters. The isolation of these harsh landscapes forced Thomas to confront not only the physical challenges of his journey, but also the psychological toll. The vast, empty fields and the silence, broken only by the howl of the wind, weighed heavily on him. Yet, these trials steeled his resolve, for with each step, he carried the hope of not just uncovering, but also undoing the curse that plagued his family and land. This journey through desolate territories was not just a march across physical distances, but a profound passage through the trials and tribulations that had come to define the experience of his homeland in these dire times. It was a testament to his determination to find a solution that could bring life back to these devastated lands. Throughout his journey, Thomas encountered various individuals and families, each shaped by their desperate circumstances, yet bound by a common struggle to survive the famine. These encounters not only provided him with further insight into the widespread impact of the blight, but also deepened his understanding of the resilience and desperation of his fellow countrymen. One such encounter occurred near a small hamlet, where Thomas met an elderly couple, Eileen and Patrick, who were tending what remained of their garden. The couple shared their story of how they had tried to adapt to the failing crops by planting alternative vegetables, but with little success. Their wrinkled hands were a testament to their hard work, and their faces were etched with the worry of uncertain tomorrows. They spoke of their children who had left in search of work in the cities, leaving them to fend for themselves. Thomas shared his own experiences and his quest, which sparked a faint glimmer of hope in their eyes. They offered him a night's shelter, a warm meal, and directions to a nearby ruin that might hold clues to his quest. Further along his path, Thomas came across a group of young siblings scavenging in the forest. They were thin and ragged, their eyes wary but curious. As he approached, they initially recoiled, but Thomas's gentle demeanor soon won their trust. He learned that they were orphans, their parents victims of the famine, and they survived on what little they could gather from the land. Thomas shared his food with them and listened to their tales of survival, stories that were both heartbreaking and inspiring. He taught them a few tricks for identifying edible plants and left them with part of his provisions, moved by their resilience and resourcefulness. In a particularly desolate village, Thomas encountered a weary priest standing outside a dilapidated church, its doors open but empty. The priest, Father Collins, recounted the exodus of his congregation, who had either fled in search of food or succumbed to the famine. He spoke of his daily struggles to provide moral support to those who remained, despite his own doubts and loneliness. The conversation turned to the curse, and Father Collins offered a prayer for Thomas's journey, hoping that some divine intervention might aid him in his quest. On the edge of a once thriving town, now nearly abandoned, Thomas met a woman named Xiaobon, who was desperately trying to sell handmade crafts to passers-by. Her story was one of loss and determination, as she struggled to make ends meet after her husband had gone to America, hoping to send back money. She spoke of the curse as a metaphor for their collective misfortune, expressing skepticism yet also a willingness to grasp at any possibility for relief. Her perspective challenged Thomas to think critically about the solutions he sought and the real impact any answers might have on the community. These encounters painted a vivid portrait of a country in crisis, each individual and family adding depth and context to the pervasive impact of the blight. For Thomas, these were not just passers-by, but embodiments of the struggle and hope that defined his quest. They provided not only information and support, but also a sense of shared purpose, reinforcing his commitment to finding a way to lift the curse and restore life to his community. Thomas's journey, driven by encounters and tales of resilience, eventually led him to a remote area rumored to contain the ruins of ancient significance. Following a rough map sketched by an old villager, Thomas navigated through dense undergrowth and rugged terrain, his determination unwavering despite the physical toll. After several hours of challenging travel, Thomas arrived at a clearing where the silhouette of stone structures broke the horizon. The ruins, covered in moss and ivy, appeared as eerie shadows against the overcast sky, their presence a stark reminder of a forgotten past. This was the place he had heard of, where ancient Celtic rituals were said to have been performed, possibly holding the key to understanding the curse affecting his land. As he stepped closer, the air around him felt charged, almost as if the very atmosphere was laden with the whispers of ancient druids. The ruins were primarily composed of a semicircle of standing stones, each marked with faded symbols that could only be seen up close. These symbols, as Thomas carefully observed, matched some of the descriptions in the ancient tome he had studied. He spent the following hours meticulously documenting each stone and symbol, taking rubbings and notes. The most significant discovery came when he found a partially buried stone slab near the center of the formation. Upon clearing the debris and earth from its surface, he revealed an intricate carving that depicted a ritual figures dancing around what appeared to be a central stone, and above them, a series of lines and dots that suggested a celestial alignment. Realizing the potential importance of this discovery, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the ruins, Thomas sat among the stones, feeling a profound connection to his ancestors who had once revered these grounds. The weight of his responsibility to restore what had been disturbed felt immense, yet he was buoyed by the hope that his efforts could bring healing not only to his family's land, but also to the entire community suffering from the famine. With the clues gathered from these ancient ruins, Thomas prepared for the return journey, eager to consult with local historians and scholars who might help him decipher the symbols more fully and possibly recreate the ancient ritual that could break the centuries-old curse. In the shadow of the ancient standing stones, as Thomas continued his meticulous exploration of the site, his attention was drawn to an unusual configuration of smaller stones on the ground. They seemed deliberately placed, forming a closed circle that was not immediately noticeable from a distance. Intrigued by this arrangement, Thomas decided to investigate further, wondering if it might hold additional clues to the nature of the curse. Using his hands and a small trowel he had brought along, Thomas gently excavated the center of the stone circle. The earth was surprisingly loose, as if it had been disturbed before, but had since settled. After several minutes of careful digging, his trowel hit something solid. His heart skipped a beat as he cleared the surrounding dirt to reveal an object that was distinctly out of place among the natural stones. It was an artifact made of dark, almost black stone, carved into the shape of a spiral, an ancient symbol, often associated with cycles and the passage of time in Celtic lore. The artifact was heavier than it looked, cold to the touch, and seemed to absorb the light around it, giving it an eerie, foreboding presence. Thomas carefully lifted the artifact from its earthen bed, feeling a wave of unease as he did so. According to the legends and old tales he had studied, such artifacts were often used in rituals to either harness or banish powerful forces. This spiral stone might very well be the key to the curse that had brought so much suffering to his land. Realizing the potential significance of his find, Thomas wrapped the artifact in a cloth and placed it in his pack with the utmost care. He knew that removing such an item from its resting place could have unknown consequences, but the desperate situation at home left him feeling he had no other choice. This artifact, possibly a central piece in the ancient rituals performed here, could be the catalyst needed to reverse the curse. As he prepared to leave the ruins, the air seemed to grow colder, and the light dimmed earlier than usual. Whether it was his imagination or a tangible change in the environment triggered by the removal of the artifact, Thomas couldn't say. However, he felt an undeniable sense of urgency to return to his village and consult with those who might help him understand more about the artifact's properties and its proper use. With the forbidden artifact now in his possession, Thomas's journey back was fraught with a mix of dread and hope. He was acutely aware that he might have taken a significant risk, but driven by the desire to save his family and restore his community, he was determined to see this through, come what may. Upon his return to the village, Thomas sought the counsel of a local historian, Mrs. O'Leary, a woman well versed in the lore and legends of their region. With the forbidden artifact carefully unpacked before them, they delved into ancient texts and scrolls that Mrs. O'Leary had collected over the years. Each document was a gateway to the past, potentially holding keys to understanding the spiral stone and its ominous role. As they pored over the texts together, Thomas and Mrs. O'Leary uncovered accounts of a similar curse that had occurred centuries ago, during a time of great turmoil and strife in the region. The record spoke of a dark season when crops failed, livestock perished inexplicably, and the village faced near obliteration. The descriptions matched eerily with the current plight faced by Thomas's community. Further research revealed that the original placement of the artifact was integral to a druidic ritual and meant to maintain harmony between the natural world and the inhabitants of the land. The spiral, a symbol of continuity and balance, was central to these rituals. It was believed that disturbing this balance would unleash calamities as a form of retribution from nature itself. One particular manuscript described a forbidden ritual that was once performed in dire times to bind the land's fertility to the artifact. This ritual was only to be used as a last resort, for its consequences could be as severe as the curse itself. It involved reactivating the artifact through a specific alignment with celestial bodies, an act that would either restore balance or deepen the land's desolation, depending on the purity of intent and adherence to ancient rites. Thomas also learned about the lineage of guardians, families chosen to protect such artifacts, and the knowledge of the rituals. It appeared that his own ancestors were among these guardians, a revelation that shed light on why his land was particularly affected. The removal of the stone by one of his forebears, likely unaware of its significance, had inadvertently triggered the curse that now ravaged the land. Equipped with this newfound understanding, Thomas realized the gravity of his responsibility not only to his family and village, but also to the generations past who had suffered from similar tragedies. The historical insights provided him with a clearer path forward, the need to restore the artifact to its rightful place and perform the ritual correctly to hopefully reverse the curse and heal the land. The connection between the curse's history and the tragedies that befell his ancestors was a sobering reminder of the cyclical nature of such calamities when the delicate balance between man and nature was disrupted. With this knowledge, Thomas felt a mix of dread and determination, knowing that the steps he would take next had to honor the old ways meticulously, as the well-being of his community hung in the balance. With a heavy heart but steadfast resolve, Thomas prepared to undertake the ritual that he hoped would reverse the curse plaguing his land. He gathered his family and a few trusted members of the community who, after witnessing the depth of his research and the sincerity of his efforts, chose to stand with him despite their initial skepticism. The ritual was to be conducted at the site of the ancient ruins where Thomas had found the artifact. Under the guidance of the notes and diagrams from the ancient texts, they arranged the stones as they had originally been before the disruption. The spiral stone was to be placed at the center of the stone circle during a specific lunar phase, which was approaching in a few days. As the night of the ritual drew near, Thomas and his group prepared by collecting the necessary natural elements that the texts prescribed. This included water from a nearby spring, herbs that were native to the land, and an offering of grains and fruits that were harvested despite the blight. Each item was carefully selected for its symbolic representation of life and growth. On the night of the ritual, the air was thick with a palpable tension, mixed with a hint of hope. The moon was just visible through the clouds, casting a pale light over the stone circle. The participants formed a circle around the arrangement, each holding a torch to light the darkness around them. Thomas began the ritual by placing the spiral stone back at its designated spot at the center of the stone circle. He then led the group in a series of chants, the words echoing ancient prayers that called for forgiveness and healing from the spirits of the land. As instructed by the texts, they poured the spring water over the spiral stone, mingled with the crushed herbs, symbolizing the rehydration and rejuvenation of the earth. Following this, Thomas and the others placed the offerings of grains and fruits around the stone, each participant expressing their wishes for renewal and abundance. The ceremony concluded with a final, solemn plea to the spirits, asking for the restoration of balance and prosperity to their lands. As they completed the ritual, a gentle rain began to fall, a rare occurrence in the recent drought-stricken months. The rain, light at first but gradually growing steadier, seemed to cleanse the air and the land around them. Whether it was a sign of the curse lifting or merely a coincidence, it brought a moment of peace and a glimmer of hope to all present. Exhausted but uplifted, the group returned to the village in silence, the weight of their actions settling in their hearts. Thomas knew that the true impact of the ritual might not be known immediately, but he felt a deep sense of fulfillment, having done everything within his power and knowledge to heal his land and honor his ancestors. The days that followed would reveal whether the ritual had been successful in reversing the curse. Regardless of the outcome, Thomas's attempt had already begun to mend the fractures within his community, bringing them together in a shared hope for a better future. As the time to perform the critical ritual approached, the need for unity and collective strength became more pronounced than ever. Thomas, having returned from his solitary quest with the Margaret, ever the pillar of strength, took it upon herself to rally the family each morning, reinforcing the importance of their upcoming task and the potential it held for healing not only their land, but also their community's spirit. Her resolve helped to steady her children, who, inspired by their parents' courage, prepared to play their roles in the ritual. Aidan, the eldest son, worked alongside his father to prepare the site of the ancient ruins. He helped to clear the area of overgrowth and debris, ensuring that the setting of the ritual would be as precise as the ancient texts demanded. His efforts and his growing leadership provided a strong sense of hope and continuity for the younger members of the family. Bridget, who had always shown an interest in her mother's herbal knowledge, gathered the necessary herbs and spring water required for the ritual. Her knowledge of the local flora, combined with her mother's teachings, proved invaluable in selecting the most potent and symbolically appropriate plants for their purpose. Conor, the youngest, took on the responsibility of gathering the community offerings of grains and fruits. His innocent earnestness in explaining the purpose of the offerings touched many hearts within the village, bringing forth contributions from even those who had been doubtful. Thomas's closest allies, a small group comprising fellow landowners and longtime friends, began to spread word of the planned ritual, framing it as a final stand against the blight that threatened their very existence. Their advocacy and support helped to mitigate the lingering doubts among the villagers, building a modest but committed cohort ready to support the ritual. On the eve of the ritual, the group gathered at Thomas's home for a night of preparation and reflection. They shared a modest meal, during which Thomas expressed his gratitude and outlined the proceedings for the next day. This gathering was not just strategic but deeply emotional, serving as a reaffirmation of their bonds and their shared commitment to the survival and prosperity of their community. As dawn broke the next day, the group, feeling a renewed sense of purpose and unity, marched to the ancient site. They were not just a family and a few allies now, they were representatives of a community's hope, bearing the weight of their forebears' missteps and the potential for redemption. This final stand, born of desperation but carried out with unwavering resolve, was their collective effort to reclaim control of their destiny and restore the balance that had been lost. In the midst of their collective efforts to address the blight through the ancient ritual, Thomas and his allies became increasingly aware of certain individuals within the community who had been exploiting the famine for personal gain. As the village grappled with scarcity and despair, these individuals had seen an opportunity to enrich themselves, taking advantage of the community's desperation. One such individual was Mr. Doyle, a landowner who had been hoarding resources. He had amassed a significant stockpile of grains and other essentials, selling them at exorbitant prices. His actions had caused considerable strife in the village, as many families struggled to afford basic necessities. As the day of the ritual approached, Thomas decided it was crucial to confront these exploitative practices head-on, to not only ensure the community's unity, but also to uphold moral integrity. He and a group of supporters, composed of both family and friends, organized a meeting to address these grievances directly with those involved. The confrontation took place in the village hall, a space that had once hosted celebrations and communal gatherings. The atmosphere this time was charged with tension. Thomas stood at the front, flanked by his allies, facing Mr. Doyle and a few others who had been identified as hoarders. "Your actions have not only deepened our suffering but fractured our community," Thomas stated, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "In these times of grave hardship, it is our duty to support one another, not to profit from our neighbor's pain." Mr. Doyle, feeling the weight of the community's gaze, initially tried to justify his actions, claiming he was merely a businessman. However, the collective mood was not forgiving. The room buzzed with murmurs of agreement from others, and as more individuals spoke out, sharing their own stories of struggle and exploitation, the tide of sentiment turned decidedly against the hoarders. Margaret stepped forward, her presence commanding silence. "We stand at the brink, ready to restore the balance that was lost, not just in our fields, but in our hearts," she declared. "Can you not see the damage your greed has done? Will you not join us in making things right?" Faced with the united front of the community, Mr. Doyle and the others bowed to the pressure. They agreed to release their hoarded supplies at fair prices and pledged to contribute to the communal efforts. This resolution, hard-won through confrontation and the moral resolve of the community, marked a pivotal moment in the village's fight against the blight. This confrontation did not just resolve a practical issue of resource distribution, it was a cathartic moment for the community, reaffirming their collective values and their commitment to each other. It strengthened their resolve to proceed with the ritual, now not only as an attempt to lift a mystical curse, but as a symbol of their renewed unity and moral fortitude. In the days following the ritual, the village of Thomas and his family was enveloped in a palpable sense of suspense and anticipation. The rain that had started gently during the ritual continued intermittently, breathing a touch of life back into the parched earth. It was a small sign, but to the villagers, it was a whisper of hope, a possible indication that their efforts to mend the ancient wrongs might be bearing fruit. Gradually, as the land soaked up the rain, there were timid signs of recovery. The fields, long barren, showed hints of green as fledgling shoots began to break through the soil. It wasn't a complete turnaround, but it was enough to lift the spirits of those who had participated in the ritual, and even some who had doubted. Thomas, who had invested so much of himself in the quest to understand and reverse the curse, felt a cautious relief. However, he knew that the true measure of their success would be seen in the seasons to come. He continued to monitor the land closely, consulting with Mrs. O'Leary and other knowledgeable figures about ways to nurture and sustain the fledgling recovery. The community's response to the visible changes in the landscape was mixed. While many shared in the cautious optimism, feeling a renewed connection to the land and each other, there were others who remained skeptical, their confidence shaken too deeply by the years of hardship. This division created an undercurrent of tension as the village grappled with its beliefs and expectations about the future. The individuals who had been hoarding resources and exploiting the famine found themselves increasingly isolated as the community's spirit of cooperation strengthened. The public confrontation and the visible signs of recovery encouraged a shift toward more communal attitudes and practices. This shift was slow but steady, as more villagers began to participate in collective farming efforts and resource-sharing initiatives. Margaret and the children, emboldened by the changes, took active roles in these communal activities. They helped organize seed exchanges and shared their knowledge of crop rotation and natural pest control methods, which were critical in preventing another catastrophe. Their home became a hub of learning and discussion, bridging gaps between the old ways and new understandings. However, the emotional and psychological scars of the famine and the curse lingered. The village healer, along with the priest, held sessions to help people cope with their grief and loss. These sessions, often held in the church, provided a space for emotional healing and spiritual restoration, complementing the physical recovery of the land. As the anniversary of the ritual approached, the village planned a commemoration to honor the struggle they had endured and the unity they had forged. Thomas stood before the community, not just as a leader, but as a testament to the power of belief and perseverance. He spoke of the importance of respecting the land and its ancient guardians, ensuring that the mistakes of the past were not repeated. The aftermath of the curse-breaking attempt was a time of rebuilding and reflection, a period marked by slow healing and the cautious blossoming of hope. While the curse had been a dark chapter in the village's history, the efforts to overcome it had sown seeds of resilience and unity that would, in time, grow as surely as the crops in their fields. The famine that swept through Thomas's village left a deep and indelible mark on every aspect of community life. Homes that once buzzed with the vibrancy of daily routines now held a quieter, more somber atmosphere. The toll was both material and emotional. Financially, the family faced near ruin. The savings they had painstakingly accumulated over the years had dwindled to almost nothing, spent on buying scarce food at inflated prices and attempting various unsuccessful methods to save their crops. The economic stability that had once given them modest comfort and security was now a relic of the past. Emotionally, the impact was even more severe. The stress and constant worry over food and future prospects wore heavily on Thomas and Margaret. They struggled to maintain a facade of strength and optimism for their children, but the cracks were evident in their tired eyes and forced smiles. The children, too, bore their own scars from the famine. Aidan, Bridget, and Connor had lost the carefree joy of their youth, their experiences during these hard times forcing them to mature prematurely. Socially, the famine reshaped community interactions. Trust, a commodity once freely given and received among neighbors, had become strained. Incidents of theft and disputes over resources had injected a wariness into relationships that had previously been marked by mutual aid and cooperation. The community as a whole grieved not only for what had been lost, but also for what had been irrevocably changed. Relationships between families, friends, and neighbors were tested, some strengthened by shared hardship, others fractured under the weight of survival instincts. The village's social fabric, once tightly knit, now showed patches of disconnection and isolation. Despite the ritual's promise of renewal, the memory of those lost months continued to haunt the village. The churchyard held fresh graves, a somber reminder of the human cost of the famine. Each stone was a testament to a life cut short, a potential unfulfilled. The community gatherings, once filled with laughter and lively debates, now often turned into collective memorials where stories of the deceased were shared and tears were shed. In reflecting on these losses, Thomas and his family realized that recovery would be a long and arduous journey, not just in replanting fields or rebuilding the economy, but in healing hearts and mending the bonds of community. The famine had taken much from them, but it had also instilled a resilience that was slowly germinating, much like the new shoots in their fields, promising a future that, while irrevocably altered, held glimmers of hope and renewal. As the village slowly emerged from the shadow of the famine, reflections on the events revealed a tapestry of resilience and unity that had, in moments of deep despair, shone brightly among the community members. This period of reflection brought into focus how the crisis had forged bonds of solidarity that were, in many cases, unexpected but profoundly transformative. Throughout the ordeal, the O'Reilly family, like many others, had found inner strengths they hadn't known they possessed. Thomas, who had once felt overwhelmed by the burden of his family's legacy and the immediate needs of survival, found a new sense of purpose in his quest to understand and counteract the curse. His leadership during the crisis had not only helped his family, but it also inspired others in the village to look beyond their individual struggles and consider the community's needs. Margaret's role had been equally pivotal. Her practical knowledge of herbs and natural remedies had provided much-needed support to not just her family but to neighbors, forging a network of mutual care that extended beyond simple exchanges of goods. Her home became a place where people could find a kind word and a listening ear, creating a haven that helped preserve the community's morale. The children, Aidan, Bridget, and Connor, learned the importance of cooperation and empathy through their involvement in the community's survival efforts. They witnessed firsthand how collective action could lead to solutions that individual efforts might not achieve. This lesson in unity and collaboration was a profound shift from the independent spirit they had been raised to value. Within the wider village, the crisis had necessitated a breaking down of old barriers and prejudices. Neighbors who had once harbored grudges found themselves working side by side, sharing resources, and supporting one another's well-being. This shift was not without its challenges, but as they faced these obstacles together, a new understanding and respect for one another emerged. The ritual, a focal point of their shared effort to reclaim control over their fate, was a testament to their unity. It had brought together diverse members of the community, each contributing in their way, whether through physical labor, knowledge, or spiritual support. The night of the ritual, under the stars and surrounded by the ancient stones, had been a poignant symbol of their collective resolve. As they moved forward, the community took pride in these displays of resilience and unity. They understood that the bonds formed in the heat of crisis were precious and needed to be nurtured. Community meetings became more frequent, focusing not only on recovery plans, but also on maintaining the solidarity that had been crucial to their survival. These reflections were not just about acknowledging what had been endured, but also about learning from those experiences. The village recognized that while the physical scars might heal, the memories of what they had overcome together would serve as a lasting foundation for a stronger, more unified future. The resilience they had demonstrated and the unity they had forged were now seen as central pillars upon which to build a revitalized community. As the seasons changed and the land slowly began to heal, the village witnessed the first true signs of recovery. The fields, once barren, now blossomed modestly with new crops. The air, filled with the fresh scent of earth and growth, carried a sense of renewal that touched every corner of the community. This renewal was not just of the land, but of the spirit of the village itself, which had endured the darkest of times and emerged not unscathed, but undeniably stronger. Thomas, who had once set out on a desperate quest to uncover the roots of a curse, now walked through his fields with a lighter step. He watched as his children, Aidan, Bridget, and Connor, worked the land with a sense of ownership and a respect for the delicate balance of nature they had come to understand deeply. The successful lifting of the curse had not only restored their land, but it also instilled a new ethic centered around respect for the ancient practices and a commitment to the welfare of the entire community. Margaret, with her enduring strength, continued to play a vital role in the village's healing process. Her home remained a hub of communal activity, where people gathered to share stories, exchange advice, and support each other through the ongoing challenges of rebuilding. Her knowledge of natural remedies, once a lifeline in the darkest days, now contributed to a broader understanding of health and wellness in the community. The unity that had been forged in the crisis became the cornerstone of the new village ethos. Neighbors who had stood together during the famine continued to support each other, ensuring that no one was left behind as the village prospered anew. The bonds formed through shared suffering and mutual aid had created a robust network of relationships that transformed the social landscape of the village. On the anniversary of the ritual that had marked the turning point in their struggle, the village held a celebration unlike any before. It was a festival of gratitude, attended by every family, where stories of the past were shared not with sorrow, but with a sense of triumph. Songs filled the air, dances traced the patterns of their renewed bonds, and the feast included dishes made from the first successful harvest since the blight. As the sun set on the day of celebration, Thomas stood beside Margaret, watching their community revel in the joy of resurgence. He reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point: the initial despair, the search for answers, the unity of effort, and finally, the renewal. It was a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit and the power of community. This new dawn was marked not by the absence of challenges, but by the shared commitment to face them together, drawing on the lessons of the past. The village, enlightened by the ordeal, now looked to the future with a cautious optimism, ready to nurture the delicate balance between man and nature, tradition and progress. As the stars appeared in the night sky, the flickering lights of the celebration below mirrored the celestial splendor above, a beautiful symbol of the village's hope and resilience. This was more than a recovery, it was a rebirth, a true new dawn for a community